Cory. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I am appreciative to have you here. You're one of the first wine reps that I remember calling on me when I started my job at Ozumo, which was my first buying job in San Francisco. I guess it was my only buying job. Well, it was basically my only buying job in San Francisco. And one of the things I always appreciated was the thoughtfulness that you put into the wines that you brought me. You know, a lot of people will just sometimes bring wine and throw whatever in the bag.
Whatever you have to
not think about
have.
it. Yeah, whatever's on goal. And I just remember like you bringing me stuff like Freeman and Byron Kasuge and like things that make sense, right, with like a Japanese program. And then I even remember you brought me, I think it was the Adafos, the one that had like kind of a Japanese print on it.
Yeah.
And I was like, you really put a lot of time and effort and thought into it. It wasn't just like, it's a sushi restaurant, Sauvignon Blanc, a bag of Sauvignon Blanc or something. You put time and effort into it. So one of the things I've always appreciated about you is your thoughtfulness and kind of your, meticulous process, I think, that you go through when it comes to being a professional. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Actually, that was like the magic of working at Swirl Wine Brokers back then. We had all these really great like small producers, and there was never any like major sales goals. It was just like go sell wine.
Right.
So that was like the greatest like first wine rep job, because I got to really just curate selections every day and pick the wines that I actually really liked, and I would leave the wines that I didn't like at home.
Yeah.
Don't tell them.
That's funny. No, I mean, I think even for me, right now, we have a goal, but it's basically on everything in the book. And then I have and then we're doing this new quarterly incentive, where we focus on particular producers. And, I'll set up an appointment and they're like, yeah, I'm looking for something Italian. And I'm just like, how do I fit Melville into this bag?
Right,
it doesn't
exactly.
belong there, but I'm going to find out a way to get it in. I know you only buy Italian, but are you sure you only buy Italian? No. I think it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because in a way, if you don't focus on some of the smaller producers or even some of the medium producers, then they start going like, oh, well, why am I here? But at the time, you guys were still distributing in Southern California, right?
Actually, when I started, it was just NorCal.
Oh, okay.
They had just closed the SoCal
right. During the
portion
pandemic.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So when I started, it was actually during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I started in April of 2021.
Jesus.
So actually, it gave me a lot of time to really like slowly ramp up.
Yeah.
Because all the restaurants were actually still closed at that time.
Yeah.
But I was actually I had worked in restaurants for at least a decade before that, or I was at Ferry Plaza Wine Merchant at that time beforehand. So I was like itching to get out of those like restaurant hours. So I was like extremely excited to get my first sales gig. And at that time, all the restaurants were closed, but everybody had like time to meet and taste because they didn't really have that much to do.
Yep.
At that time.
Yeah.
So I got to know everybody really well, and it was a great like kind of just on-ramp for being a wine rep. And then it wasn't until September when actually all the restaurants started reopening. My colleague, who was the other Swirl rep in San Francisco, had left.
I didn't know that he was right? She. Oh,
yeah.
Maybe I'm... Well, there was a guy that was there forever, right?
Okay, so that was Doug.
Doug,
yeah.
Right. That's the one I always hear about. Everybody's like, oh, Doug.
Yeah,
it's either Doug or you. Those are the two I hear about. And
yeah,
obviously Bianca
well,
now,
Doug
but...
was my predecessor, and Doug actually, during that time, too, Doug was trying to retire.
Yeah.
So actually, the fun part is I had actually overheard Doug talking to my manager at Ferry Plaza about the job opening at Swirl.
Yeah.
And so actually, I had already put in my 2 weeks notice at Ferry Plaza. Mm-hmm. I was working at another restaurant that I had started, and that was my first time back in a restaurant on a floor. Like I was trying, the som roll, and it was during the pandemic, so it was like carrying the tables. We had like one of the most beautiful patios in the city. Such an incredible restaurant to work at. And it would take an hour to set up the patio in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then, a lot of work all night, and then tearing down the patio, bringing it back in for another hour at the end of the night. So I wasn't leaving until about like 12:30, 1 o'clock every day. And I was just like, man, I used to be able to do this, and it was not as easy as I remember. And then
especially not while wearing a mask.
Yeah,
and carrying
exactly.
patio furniture is so much different than like waiting tables.
Yeah, so it was a big transition, because I was like in restaurant management for a few years, and then I was in retail at the Wine Merchant, and then I went back into being a som and floor server at a restaurant. And it would just, I realized quickly that it might not be for me, but I was working there at night, and I was still doing my 2 weeks notice at Ferry Plaza.
I see.
So while I was there, I had overheard Doug Ueno talking to my manager, and he's like, yeah, I'm really trying to retire, and we just need somebody who's really young and fresh, and we can show them the ropes. And I was like, oh man, that sounds like me.
Yeah.
So I literally, after he left, I went and talked to my boss, and I was like, hey, I know I already put my 2 weeks in, and I know I'm already working somewhere else, but can you tell me about that job?
Yeah, that's great.
And Debbie Zacharias is the owner of, or one of the owners, her and Peter, Ferry Plaza. And my manager, Sarah, she told Debbie, and Debbie is really great friends with Sarah Floyd. And she texted Sarah Floyd, and she's like, hey, Cory, you should talk to Cory. He wants to interview for the job.
I love that.
And the rest was history.
Small world. That's one of the beautiful things about it is that it's a small world. People are well connected, and like, just put in time. You do things right. You didn't walk out of the job. Otherwise, you would never have been able to have that, listen to the conversation, and you probably wouldn't have got like a recommendation either, right? It's like doing things right kind of pays off in the long run.
Oh, yeah.
Or even the short run here in our industry, because it's such a small industry. But and then before you were in SF, take us kind of maybe through your journey, where you're from, how you got into the service industry, where wine came in to be part of it. And...
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in South Bend, Indiana.
Okay.
My family did not drink wine. My first wine was a Barefoot Merlot.
Love it.
I realized then that I hated wine. Anyway, so there was a long ways between then and later. So we were more of like a Budweiser family. And yeah, so went to school, IU Bloomington, and studied journalism. Worked a couple internships right after college. I worked at PBS, and then I worked at a news station in Indianapolis. And then I also was bartending on the side. And that was how I actually made money. And because back then I graduated like smack dab in the middle of the recession. It was like 2010. So it wasn't really any jobs that actually paid money. Brutal. It was just free jobs. So free jobs, and then, service industry. So that's how I kind of, found myself into the service industry. And then I worked at this microbrewery bar in Indianapolis, and moved up to Chicago after that, and started working. I worked at the Grand Lux Cafe, which is a 600-seat flagship higher-end version of the Cheesecake Factory.
Right.
So that's how I got this like exceptional like fine dining training. It was like a month-long like training program. Wow. And like all these like tests and everything. The job was like hell. I hated it. Yeah. And then I ended up moving to a bar in Boys Town in Chicago. It was called Taverna 750. Okay. And that was like actually one of the greatest service jobs ever. Like I was bartending, I was serving. It was like a martini bar. We had to wear like very fashionable outfits, and we were like highly rated, so it was always busy. So I was always walking out of there with like armful of money. So it was like so much fun in my like early 20s living in Chicago. And it was just such a blast. And I remember actually like that my next encounter with wine was there, and I remember we had a reserve wine list, and we did a reserve tasting. It was with the LVMH rep. And I just remember, like, all of us had a party the night before was someone's birthday, and we all stayed up really late. And that next morning, we were drinking Dom Perignon at 10 o'clock, and it just all felt just like garbage.
Yeah.
And we basically were like, oh, I'm just dumping, like,
That's
these
so
really expensive wines in the trash or down in the spit cup, and I still like think back about that. I'm like, oh my God, I've come so far from
so
those days.
That rep was probably like, these fucking kids.
I know, such little brats. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah. And then at that point, if you asked me to even remember one of those wines at the time, I like couldn't. But anyway, so fast forward, moved to San Francisco, like quit my job, just like moved across the country. I'd always wanted to live in California, and my friend, one of my best friends who I grew up with, who also wanted to live in California, her boyfriend worked at Google, so she and him moved in together in San Francisco, and they had an extra room, and I found myself here.
Dope.
And then I worked in every like odd job I could, just like, you know, trying to scrape by at the beginning, and I ended up working for this woman named Natasha, and she owned a Japanese restaurant, and then she was opening another restaurant in North Beach, and I really wanted to get experience opening a restaurant. I kind of had this like idea I wanted to be a restaurateur, and I went and worked for her, and then that restaurant never came to fruition. Apparently, it was misrepresented by the landlord as having a liquor license, but it was not zoned as a restaurant. So
God.
Anyway, that ended up into a 6-year lawsuit, but we ended up opening a little deli and ramen shop on Polk Street called Common Sage. So from there, I was managing Common Sage and Mikaku Restaurant, which was downtown, a sushi bar, and they gave me the role of purchasing the wine and the sake and the beer. So that was my first time doing that. I was like, this is actually really kind of fun, like picking the wines and kind of getting to know, you know, the different flavor profiles and creating pairings for food. And so I actually really got into it, and I started taking WSET, and I started studying in the court. And also the chef, he was a retired, like, award-winning chef from Osaka, but he had moved to the U.S. to become an artist and do like he was making puppets.
I love that.
Like a marionette like maker. Right. That was like what he retired to do. But anyway, he was still working there, and he loved French wine. So he was like, the best wine in the world is Gevrey Chambertin. Yeah. So from there, I quickly developed a French wine love, and after about 5 years working for them, I moved to Ferry Plaza just to get a little bit more, touch more bottles and learn more. And, you know, Debbie and Peter and Sarah had such an incredible selection, and they were such, you know, just great, like, people to learn from in the wine industry. And then I got to Swirl, and then after a couple years at Swirl, I ended up getting recruited by Artemis Domaines and working for Eisele Vineyard. So, I mean, it's just really, it's kind of crazy going from like dumping wine down a spit cup to like working at one of the most incredible vineyards in Napa Valley, and like also working with the French wines from like Chateau Latour. And it's a crazy, I'm like, oh my God, how did I get here?
Full
kind
180
of situation.
Dumping Dom P, and now you're selling Jacquesson.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my history.
I love that. I mean, it's so funny to kind of like hear everybody's journey individually. It's one of the things that I love the most about hosting the podcast is like talking to people and like hearing like how their journey went, because it's similar to mine. You know, I started managing a restaurant when I was like 18, just turning 19. And in Texas, you can taste wine when you're 18 if you're responsible for the beverage program. And I would taste wine and I would just like, I'm never going to like wine. I don't like this. Yeah, I tasted wine when I was like 14 out of my mom's box of wine under the sink. And it was like, Sutter Home White Zin or whatever. And I just like spit it out. And I was like, I'll never drink wine, And my parents got into wine more when I turned 16. And they went to Napa and they came back with all this wine. And they're like, you should taste it. You should taste it. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And similarly, I like got into the bartending side of things, and wine was not for me. I hated it, and I like slowly found my way back into.
Do you remember like when you got to California? Maybe you were here for a little longer than me, but I remember getting here and I was like, oh man, that restaurant only has beer and wine. Do you remember that feeling?
Yeah, it was weird. Yeah, I mean, it's there was a few places in Texas that would be beer and wine only because it was like Texas is really uptight when it comes to liquor. But I mean, honestly, coming from California and moving back to California, I missed California because in Texas, it's liquor store only. Liquor stores close at 9 p.m. They're not open on Sundays. They're not open on holidays. If you want to buy beer and wine, it has to be before midnight in a store, or you can buy until 1 a.m. on Saturdays only. And if you want to get a drink in a restaurant on Sunday, you can't before noon unless you have food in front of you. It's like all these weird loopholes.
I remember that. Yeah, Indiana was the same. Like
Yeah.
in college, we would have to drive to the border
Yeah,
of like
yeah.
Illinois to get like alcohol.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. Galveston had the most bars per capita of any county in Texas. So
Okay.
like we're in a pretty good place, but yeah, there's a couple friends I had that lived in dry counties and would
Yeah.
have to drive the next county over.
Well,
to
I
buy
lived
booze.
actually, so I grew up in northern Indiana on State Line Road. So it was the border of Indiana and Michigan.
I see.
So on my street, literally, it was all liquor stores.
That's so funny.
like, and every Sunday, it was just like lines down the street
That's
and cars
hilarious.
to get booze. So
Yeah, I remember driving from Texas to New Orleans, and right when you cross the border, there's like 3 casinos because there's no gambling in Texas, but there's plenty of gambling in New Orleans and Louisiana. I'm sorry, and it was always the same thing. It's like, what can you get in this state and not this state? California, we're lucky; we get a lot of it. We get good produce, we have good wine, and we have gambling and liquor everywhere. So,
yep.
the land of the free, the home of the brave. No,
Yeah, I love California.
yeah, most of the time I love California too. So, taxes kind of suck sometimes, but I guess if the roads aren't full of holes, I'm happy. And, for the most part, things are nice. Weather's pretty kick-ass too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm here for the weather,
Yeah.
even though I totally realized I moved to the wrong, like the cold part of California. The moment I got here, I had expected, I had watched SoCal Summer on MTV my whole life.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I was expecting this beachy vibe in San Francisco, and it just was. It was actually, I mean, I still so actually the first year I was here, there was a polar vortex I left Chicago, and that was the year they got hit by the polar vortex.
Yeah, yep.
So I was we were also in a drought year. So looking back in wine years now, I'm recollecting each year. That was 13. And we ended up having really warm weather all the way till the end of the year. And then in the wintertime, it was pretty mild. And I remember we were at the beach in February, and I'm texting all my friends in Chicago, and I'm like, man.
Kiss my ass. yeah,
Exactly. So, yeah, no, it wasn't that bad.
Oh,
and
that's funny.
now I'm a lifer.
That's good. Yeah, I like to give my mom shit. My dad used to always give me shit. So I lived in Texas for a decade, and my dad would always text me the weather, and he would say haha, bitch. And he would just
Yeah.
send me the thermostat. It'd be 72, perfect,
Yep.
blue skies. And I would send him the thermostat back, and it'd be 100 degrees, 90% humidity, just awful, But every now and then we'd get a pretty day, or it'd be raining. That's not something that they had a lot in the desert. So I would say, hey, look, we have rain. Oh, look, my garden's growing. So we'd poke fun back and forth. My mom's in Texas now, so every now and then we talk about the weather, and I it's one of the things I miss the least about Texas. I like the less taxes. A lot of the people were really nice, but we got a daughter. Got to think about
Yeah.
the future and her future and choices and stuff, and it's a little different. It's different when you have a kid, or
Yeah.
when you start thinking about the future. That was the switch for me. Maybe some people think about the future sooner. I was just very present in the day, and now I have a kid, and I'm just like, wait, I have to be responsible for somebody else?
Yeah.
Like, this is fucking weird. Okay, cool. So let's kind of like look back. So Indiana, and then into Chicago, into the bar scene. You weren't into wine. Was there a particular spirit that you were into? Like, where was your first kind of passion in the beverage industry? Was it anything in particular, or was it just mixed beverages?
Yeah, I was actually really into mixology.
Cool.
Yeah, so the bar I was working at, we made like incredible cocktails, and we had like a really great cocktail team. So we were like doing all like the smoky stuff and like the cool like lighting things on fire. So I got really into that. And then when I came out to California, I wanted to pursue doing that a little more. But that was my like first stint into like trying to do some consulting. Obviously, I was like 25 years old and didn't really know what I was doing at the time, but I tried. But from there, I mean, at that point, like I ended up working in restaurants that didn't have a liquor license.
Right.
So I ended up getting much more into wine as I went. I mean, but it really wasn't until that experience of picking all those wines that I started developing a passion for it. Like learning about it is like so exciting. There's like so much, depth in wine. There's like soil, there's like geography. I won the geography bee in like middle school, by the way.
Awesome.
So I'm like very into maps.
Right.
So that's one of my that was like really exciting. So, I mean, I was really into the mixology, but my calling really became wine. Like I didn't expect that, but I mean, when I was still doing that program and also always just pondering like, how am I going to get out of these restaurant hours? I was like, well, we have such an incredible wine industry in this state. So that was like my first hint. And I was like, I'm definitely not going to go into tech. I'm just not that guy.
Right.
And not a bioscience like guy, but I was like, wine, I like wine.
Could do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So wine really is like wine is the passion. But also I met in 2020 when I was working at Ferry Plaza, I met a young man named Johnny who I'm with now. He's my partner. And he would come into the store and like be like such a know-it-all. He was like telling me, trying to show off his like wine knowledge because he was taking WSET at the time.
I see.
So, but he was a tech guy. So he started. He would show off, and I was just like, God, that guy is so annoying. And then like there was another day he came back, and he actually walked into the store. This is pandemic time, so you had to put hand sanitizer on your hand before you entered the store.
Yep.
So one of my colleagues, like, he walked in and didn't do that. And one of my colleagues, like, was like, hey, you need to put hand sanitizer on before you touch anything. So anyway, and then I, like, ran up to him. I was like, oh, it's okay. It's okay. I'm so sorry about that. And here's some hand sanitizer.
Yeah, perfect.
And, but anyway, then he was, like, asking me questions, and he, like, went to the fancy fridge and he decided to buy something like fancy to impress me. And I was like, okay, this guy like loves wine, so he's pretty cool. Yeah. So he ended up buying a few nice bottles, and then I gave him my card, and then he looked me up on Facebook.
Awesome.
And we ended up like, he convinced me to hang out with him to do like blind tasting practice.
So I love that. That's sweet. That's a good angle.
Yeah. So we did a lot of blind tasting, and then I met his friends, and they were all taking WSET. They were all like non-industry
all the tech
people.
kids taking WSET. Wow, that's cool.
So it was really cool. So I ended up like finding a new group of people that were like really into wine. And we all just like took that time during the pandemic to like really deep dive like further and just taste every kind of wine. I mean, I had that great discount at the retail store.
That too, yeah.
So I was able to like crowdsource money to get like cool bottles.
Sick.
And so that was like that was when it really like kind of like really just ignited and became a passion.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would just say wine is the one.
Yeah.
I mean, the mixology, I was like okay at it, but I'm better at wine.
More just like a hobby, and this is more like a passion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say so.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. I mean, it's interesting to hear about kind of these, you know, exterior industry kind of groups that are super into wine. You know, there's one guy that you know I'm loosely affiliated with in a sense of like I have friends that are his friends and he has friends that are my friends and we hang out every now and then and I like him, you know, but it's just weird. It's a hard step for me, I think, to get over, and it's probably like a pride thing more than anything, where I'm just like, oh, I work my ass off to taste these wines. Not that he doesn't, right?
Yeah.
But he has the financial means to taste many wines that I don't have the financial means to. So it's always interesting for me when I see like an outsider get into wine. Like, it must be pride. It's probably 100% pride. Because like if somebody that doesn't know anything gets into wine, I'm like super excited, you know? But when somebody that's not in the industry knows probably as much as me or more than me, especially when it comes to certain producers, I'm like, that's bullshit. Like,
yeah,
fuck
I know.
that, you know?
Yeah, it does. Like, I remember, because I do remember during the pandemic when the restaurants were like selling their inventory,
Yep.
and then you would see these like guys like just buying it all and like flaunting it on Instagram, and you're just like so jealous.
Yeah.
It was just it would just hurt so bad. But also, I mean, at the same time, these guys are the guys keeping us
True.
going, and at some point I've developed an appreciation, but like I just remember that was so devastating at the time.
Yeah. I mean, as long as there's appreciation for it, you know, I think like that's what I try to remind myself of is like, even though I'm probably more jealous than anything, you know, I just like, they appreciate it. They understand it. And that's great, because I think appreciating the beverage industry is important, right? Like I grew up, my dad drank Coors Light. That's all he drank was just Coors Light. Every now and then he'd have a craft beer or an IPA or whatever. And he loved to go to breweries, but that was like his everyday drink. And when he started to get into wine, I thought it was really cool to kind of like share bottles with him and stuff. But like alcohol was not something that, and my dad would have a beer. My mom would have, you know, maybe a beer, depend on the mood, but like it wasn't something that we shared a lot of, you know, and in other cultures it is. So I'm excited that with Emery, there's always wine on the table, and
Yeah,
you know,
she gets to,
plenty of opportunities to taste.
and you're also doing your part to spread wine to the next generation.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I hope her middle name's Riesling. So if I
Yes.
wasn't, I'd be pretty much a hypocrite. So, and then let's see. So you were in a mixology. You came to San Francisco. You were, I mean, what was the impetus to go into the Japanese concept that didn't have a liquor license? Was it what was available, or were you trying to kind of get into those like mixology bars, or like did you just find a place you liked it and you stuck with it?
Honestly, at that point, I was kind of like I was kind of in a pickle at that time. I was, you know, struggling in 2013 San Francisco. It was like really hard to survive. And Natasha, she was like such a caring like figure, like who really helped me like kind of get on my feet, because, you know, I came from Chicago, and I was like, I felt like top dog, like at the bar I was working at. I was like, you know, making so much money. And then when I got here, I actually didn't know anybody. And it was really competitive to get like a really good job at the service industry. And then since I worked at such a smaller local restaurant in Chicago, like people didn't really know what it was. So, and, you know, I also was like a little shy at that time. So it just like kind of worked out. I ended up I found Natasha, and she also like found me, and like we ended up, you know, she taught me how to run a business, and she taught me how to open a new business and manage all the like paperwork and the invoices and the ordering and the budgets and managing a whole team of people. I was managing literally like 40 people with her. Like it was her, me, and the chef.
It's a big team.
Yeah, so there was a lot of people involved, and it was a lot of moving parts, but that experience, honestly, I really just wanted to, at that point in my life, I wanted to be a restaurateur. I mean, it wasn't necessarily that restaurant that was of my interest, but I did find that it was like a nice model to kind of work with at the time with my, less experience for management. So I was really happy to have that job. And from that job, I grew so much. I became so flexible in like managing
so
people,
many different roles,
managing two restaurants.
Yeah.
Like there's always, so many things that can go wrong at all times. And it was just a matter of staying calm, getting through it, and making sure you just, making sure the show still goes on every single day. And that was something that I gained from that experience. And other than that, I mean, when I was there, I really didn't have that much interest in like Japanese restaurants or Japanese culture. But working with that chef as well, he was incredible. Like nobody even knows like how incredible he was. But he was just a visionary, and like everything he made was just so gorgeous and so delicious. And he was just such like a quiet, like very under the radar kind of guy who didn't want any attention whatsoever. And he was like a big mentor for me. And just like he taught me a lot about, excellence and like just doing the right job. So but yeah, I don't know. And then from there, I was really into Japanese culture from there and really into Japanese food. And I got really into sake too. So I studied sake, and I would taste so much sake, and I was educating my like customers and my team about sake. And there were some great people in the sake industry around here as well, like Tomoko, and yeah, I ended up being like really into sake too. I am actually really well versed in sake, and like every time like a sake question comes up when I'm like studying or like on a test, I'm just like, yes,
got this. Yeah. That's
You guys
awesome.
thought you got me.
That's an Achilles heel for a lot of
Yeah.
people, and I think that's one of the things I'm appreciative about at my time at Ozumo was similar. Like I felt like I learned a lot. Did you ever try to, maybe there is one and I don't know it. So at Ferry Plaza Wine Merchant, is there a sake section? Did you try to make them expand
So there
it?
was a small sake section,
Okay.
but and then I got to be the sake buyer.
Woo,
But
okay.
I had like the budget to have like I don't know, like 6 different kinds
yeah,
of sake.
yeah, yeah.
So it really wasn't a big deal. But yeah, I tried to bring in some cool sakes that I had found, so at the Japanese restaurants outside of like Young's Market and Skurnik, who are the ones that all like the Western type restaurants work with.
Yep.
At the Japanese restaurant, you actually order a lot of Asian supplies, right?
Right.
So you're working with all these Japanese distributors.
JPSI and
Well, we were working with like
Package
JFH,
JFH.
Wismatech, which was
Wismatech,
like
yeah.
Mishimoto,
Yeah.
and then also like NA Sales.
right, NA Sales, yeah. How could I forget? World Sake.
Yeah, so there was all these really cool places that had all this incredible sake that like all the like regular like restaurants in San Francisco just couldn't even touch. Like,
And you could piggyback the grocery orders.
yeah, exactly.
That's the best part.
Oh yeah, and then like I would just like add like small like bottles, and I was building this really incredible sake collection. And then I did work with like a little bit with like Young's Market,
Right.
but I really had like this amazing selection of sake that just was like hard to find.
That's
The
so funny.
only person who was like the rival, and obviously he was much stronger, was the True Sake.
Yeah.
He knows what's up too. So-
Right. Is True Sake mostly online retailer now, or was it always?
It was always kind of online.
Okay,
But,
all right.
I mean, it's still a shop, so
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Where's it?
It's in Hayes Valley.
Oh, I can't believe I haven't been.
Yeah, so you can go in there, and like on Saturdays you can taste sake. And,
That's awesome.
yeah, it's actually a really great shop.
Because I really like Malay over on Market Street.
Yeah.
Have you been there?
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
know them. They're that's a really great little shop as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But at this point, I mean, as much as I love sake, like I rarely am one to go buy it at a
Yeah.
retail store. I'm like always after. I'm just obsessed with French wine.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's tough. I mean, personally, for me, obviously we get samples, right? So for me, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go out and buy much alcohol, you know? Like, I'll buy beer here and there, I'll buy a bottle of whiskey here and there. It's like something interesting in the $60 to $80 category that I've never had that somebody says is good. Like, I'll try it out, you know? But for the most part, I'm not buying a ton of stuff. But I think more than anything, and this is my thrifty nature maybe, is you know, I'll look at something and I immediately do the math in my brain, or I look at something and I know how much it costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then it's a hard time for me. So when I go out to drink, I drink beer.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, okay, I know the margin on it's a little less. Or,
Yes.
you know, you go to a place and you go like, oh, the BTG on that wine is 12 and they're charging 18 a glass. Like, can't justify it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I know exactly. I know how much things cost,
Yep.
and that's always been a struggle for me. But also at the same time, I like love to support restaurants.
For sure.
Like, so I do try to go out, and I'm like, even though I know it's restaurant pricing, I still want to support them, and I do, and
Yeah.
I like to buy something.
Yeah, yeah.
Often I'm traveling by myself though, so I'm on the road a lot, like
Yeah.
by myself, and so I can't always do a bottle, but I'll always like still get a nice
Cocktail
glass.
or something
Well,
by the
I
glass
always
or-
like a glass of wine, but
That's nice.
also though I totally agree with you. At the end of a day of doing wine tastings all day long, like a crisp lager, just like bubbly, refreshing,
Perfect.
is just like the
Yeah.
best end of a
Yeah.
day of wine sales.
Especially with a lot of reds.
Yeah.
You know, when you carry out a bag of red wine and you hit like 4 or 5 appointments, you know, you want to taste with them because like I feel like as a rep tasting with, and maybe this is something that you can contribute to, as a rep tasting with somebody, especially if it's your like first time tasting with them or second time tasting with them, you want to taste along with them, even if you're not really tasting it.
Well,
it's more
part
just
of
kind
that,
of this.
It's part of the like hospitality aspect of it. It's
yeah.
nice to sit down, share a beverage
Yep.
with your client
Yeah.
or your friend
Yeah.
or whatever, and that's actually that's like the greatest part of being a wine rep is like we get to bring great wines and we get to sit down and just like kind of hang out. I mean, usually the conversation it's like 60% wine talk, but then like 40% kind of just like catching up,
Get to
and
know you,
seeing
kind of
how
stuff.
you are.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's a social thing, and that's why it's like such a fun job.
Yeah, it's more relationship building than anything. And that's something I always say is like, to me, selling wine pays the bills, managing relationships is the real job, right? Like, I would rather not, and again, maybe this is the lack of pressure that's put on me, similar to how you felt at Swirl. I'd rather not make you buy something that you don't want
Right.
because I need to make that number than, ruin
Well,
our
it's not going to help
relationship.
you in the long run
No.
ever. Like it's just making people buy things is not going to make you friends. Like
Hard sells are out.
Yeah.
And I think especially in San Francisco, it's such a competitive market. There's so many distributors that like it's really easy for somebody to go like, I just don't want to do business with this book.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to do business with this rep. And they can just throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It doesn't matter if there's a couple producers that I really love. My list will be fine without them,
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, a big part of it really is like trying to bend over backwards and like find the right products
Yeah.
for these people. Like
Yeah.
they are also actually doing a job. And at this point, Psalms have like so much work to do. They have they're wearing so many hats. Like you can't waste their time. You have to bring like very special products that are going to work. And yeah, that's how that's part of the game is like you really have to just work as hard as they do as well to help them curate the best possible list.
And I think too, like there's so many wines to taste. I mean, your book is much more focused now, especially. But like there's so many wines to taste. It's like if you just hammer them with whatever's in the bag, like you're not doing yourself any favors and you're not doing them any favors. If you're hammering them with 20 Pinot Noirs in a month stretch or 2 month stretch, like everything that you have is blending together.
Oh my God, there's nothing worse than when you show up to an appointment and the rep in front of you is showing like 20 wines.
Oh yeah.
And they're like going overtime and you're also like sweating.
You have another
like,
appointment?
Because for me, I'm like, oh shoot, I'm like in Burlingame and I have to go to Sonoma in an hour and a half.
Ugh.
And like, I really can't wait for you to show up.
That's so funny.
You know,
You try to be as polite as you can. It's a hard industry,
I mean,
you know.
there's nothing you can do. You just have to. You just gotta wait.
Handle it with class.
Yeah.
Great to meet you.
Yeah, it's better also.
Have a good
It's
day.
better for
Yeah.
everybody, including your buyer and you and your wine rep and the wineries you're representing, to just show less wine.
Yeah, be concise.
Pick
Yeah.
like some really great options and.
Even on the big end, like sometimes I'll take like 10 or 12 things and I'll just say like, I don't want to open all of these. Is there something in particular that you want to
let them
taste?
pick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because to me that's always the thing too. Is like,
Yeah, especially if you don't know them that well. It's like it's nice to kind of let
Give
them
them the
choose their
option.
own adventure.
Yeah, we're gonna have to take a quick pause break. I think we've got a ladybug on our light, and I just know that it's gonna mess with the audio. So okay, and we're back. The ladybug. That's good luck, right? If the ladybug lands on you, like it didn't land on me, it landed on the light. But can I pour you some more wine?
Sure. I've still been trying to figure out what this wine is.
And again, it's not
I know
always
it's
a
not
blind
a
of a
blind.
wine. It's
I'm like in a kind of like a Southern French or Italian
Okay.
situation.
yeah.
I mean, it's a darker color,
Mhm.
so it's a darker seed grape, but it's kind of juicy. It's kind of got a
A
little
little
bit
more in there.
like a medium plus alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
kind of savory herbs, like a little rosemary and olives. So I was like,
Do you like it? Is it a good wine?
I do. Yeah, it's a nice like just quaffable like
Yep.
tasty wine.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like dry. It's elevated everything, but it's not like too crazy.
Right.
So that's why I'm like, it's not. It doesn't feel like a New World wine. So that's why I was. But I'm like, is it Syrah or is it like a Syrah blended with some Grenache and some other things?
You're gonna have to try to figure it out if you want to.
Or is it something from Italy, like that I'm just not used to? Italy is like a
Yeah.
huge blind spot for me that I am really trying to work on. So,
Well, see, now I know. If I didn't already know, now I know.
yeah.
And I guess that's maybe one of the things that is good to talk about on our sales side of things is like seller's palate, right? It's like I represent a lot of wineries from a lot of regions and I really like them, but I get used to like a particular style of wine, you know? Do you feel like how many wineries do you represent?
So,
Is it 6 or 7 or
okay, first and foremost, I work at Eisele Vineyard, so I represent Eisele Vineyard the most. And then we're under the parent company of Artemis Domaines. So I have 6 other estates.
Okay.
So it's really just kind of a family of wineries that each one is run independently, but I happen to handle the business and sales for California wholesale.
Right.
So yeah, and with that said, yeah, I get to. Some of my wines are like so precious that I am rarely out with them in the bag.
Yeah.
Like a Chateau Gruyere is not coming with me every day.
Nope.
Although those are absolutely stunning. But I do end up with usually a nice, healthy portion of Napa wines.
Yeah.
So I do have usually a couple of cabs. Like I like to bring an old one and a new one.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Parts of the year that we have our Sauvignon Blanc is my favorite part of the year.
Yeah. Super Sauvignon,
So
right?
yeah, so refreshing. And
Yeah.
then I usually have something from Latour, so another cab, and I bring I get to work with Beaufrere in Northern California,
Right.
so I get nice Pinots as well.
Yeah.
So I have a little bit of a range, but it's still pretty red heavy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't get to vary as much more like in my own professional sense. So it's more a personal personal gain by
Right.
tasting wine and
Yeah.
constantly keeping my palate updated.
When I feel like, especially you're, the last time we spoke, you're still pursuing more certifications, are you not?
Yes, I am planning to sit for the advanced sommelier exam next. So I'm currently studying for that. I could do a little bit more blind tasting practice, and I do plan to go. Tasting groups are almost always during my work hours.
Yep.
Which is really hard to break away.
Because they're off restaurant hours.
Yeah. I mean, there's like a really great tasting group that I just joined in Napa.
Oh.
And I haven't gotten to go yet, but it seems like so exciting. And I'm like, oh man, I wish I could just, I really thought about just driving up, like signing up and driving up to Napa tomorrow for that. But I was like, no, I just can't right now. But
consolidate your trips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't make it work tomorrow, but I will come soon. But anyway, so I am studying. I'm doing a lot of theory studying right now.
I see.
So with that said, I've been really deep diving into viticulture because this is something that I always kind of breezed over in the past. But working at Eisele Vineyard, it's like this incredible biodynamic estate, and there's so much that goes into the farming.
Yeah.
And it's really actually kind of cool because I have it like all at my fingertips, and like we have like the vineyard manager, Sarah Pryor, and the winemaker and wine growing, like the head is Eisele Vineyard. They're both just such forward-thinking people, and they're always experimenting and trying new things to
Push the envelope.
Just to like keep the farming great. I mean, we've been having all this global warming happening.
Yeah.
Every year it's getting warmer and warmer. So doing things like a little bit earlier pruning and a lot of cover crop management and like misting in the air, like and letting it evaporates before it hits the grapes.
That's
but it
interesting.
also like creates sunblock. And now we're trying different like pruning methods. Like sometimes we're using like cane pruning instead of the classic cordon. So anyway, there's so much to learn at Eisele Vineyard in itself.
Yeah.
And not only that, but like the clone selection. Well, we use mostly old Eisele clones, but the rootstock, it's like the vineyard was planted mostly with 3309 rootstock, which is this very elegant rootstock, but it's not great for drought resistance. So now any of the new plantings we're using 110Rs, which are like a nice balance between drought tolerance and elegance. So
Jesus.
I'm learning a lot. I'm just learning so much doing that. And actually for the first time, I actually picked grapes last week.
Awesome.
We already are harvesting. So I started
great.
picking Sauvignon Blanc, one of my faves.
Yeah.
And on Thursday I got up, I was in the vineyard actually the white grapes, it's a smaller part of the vineyard, so it's not a huge job, but they had me there at 6:15 in the morning, starting the harvest, and that was actually really exciting for me because I'm actually taller than a lot of the crew.
Right.
So I was the one having to lift the buckets of grapes like over the vines.
That's funny.
And into the moving tractor. It was like a CrossFit workout. I was like drenched in sweat. I was just like so like
It's probably pretty cold then, but you're still just sweating, right?
it started cold, but then the problem is we were racing against the sunrise.
Right.
The sun was coming fast, and we had to get those grapes in before like the weather got warmer, because Calistoga is pretty hot like, during the day. Although we're getting really nice mild weather right now. Shaping up to be a beautiful vintage.
That's what I hear.
But knock on wood. Yes. But yeah, that was a blast. So anyway, so I'm studying, but also trying to get my hands dirty in the vineyard. Next, I'm going to really deep dive into winemaking naturally as we go into that.
Great, yeah.
And I mean, even when I was picking the other day, I was like, actually, I kind of like this.
Yeah.
Like, I never thought I would like it.
Yeah.
But I really liked it. It was a blast.
I love gardening, and I've never done harvest, but I really want to. And this year, Bianca she was talking at Green and Red Winery and they said that we can go work the sorting table or help with whatever. It's a little more challenging with a kid, and when you have a job that's, you get 2 weeks of paid vacation, and you usually have to put in like a month's notice to get your vacation, it's always kind of hard to just be like, I'm taking off next week. I'm going to harvest grapes. You know what I mean? But that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I guess that whole like clonal selection kind of makes sense. Rootstock, I'm totally lost. I had Arpad Molnar here from Obsidian last week, 2 weeks ago, and he started talking about like the difference between the genetics of like oak trees and all of these other things, and I was just immediately like lost. But the way that he summarized it was really great. But yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating. We spend so much time, I think, on our side of things or on the Psalm side of things, focusing on like the winemaking side of things, or, the taste of the grape and the taste of the wine. And we don't really spend a lot of time talking about like all of the things that go on in the vineyard. You just like blanket statement, like organically farmed, biodynamically farmed, whatever. And then you just kind of close that off, move into the next topic.
Yeah.
Do you think that like, I know that taking care of the land, taking care of the grapes provides better quality fruit, but and only having this one vintage so far where you've done this, how important, like percentage wise, I guess, how important do you think that this side of things is? Is it pretty evenly split between
the farming
for the let's say the end result of quality product? Is there a lot of time and attention put into this, or is it more just like get it off the vines and
okay?
get it in
Well,
the
think
bucket?
about it this way: like 3.5 quarters of the year are farming, and then there's a little bit of winemaking.
Yeah. That's a good point.
So the farming is like crucial.
Right.
I mean, first off, you have to have. Well, I mean, having a incredible terroir like helps a lot.
Sure.
Like Eisele is just like naturally very low yielding because the soils are just deep, rocky cobblestones, and the terroir helps. But with that said, I mean, the previous family was the Araujo family who owned the vineyard before us, and they were the stewards. And what they did was they converted the vineyard to biodynamics like in 2002.
Yeah.
And also they picked really great rootstock, and then they used all the old Eisele clones because they're beautiful. And because of the decisions they made and the care that they put into taking care of the vineyard with meticulous farming, shows through. I mean, their wines are incredible now. If you drink an old Araujo estate, they're just like so delicious.
Yeah.
Anyway, so but then like now we have these beautiful old vines that were planted in the everything was replanted in the early 90s. So we have these nice old vines that are just in such a healthy state. And we're always experimenting with how we can keep the vineyard healthy and keep it moving and producing beautiful wines. And we have an entire team dedicated to doing that. So,
Perfect.
Yeah, the farming is just so important. And I mean, especially with global warming and climate change, it's just getting more and more difficult to make beautiful wines. But with that said, like with what they're doing, they're achieving these like elegant wines. Like Eisele has always been this like very elegant winery, or elegant Cabernet. There's been several great people who've made it over the years, but like it's always elegant, and like we are just doing our part to make sure we keep it elegant, and that has a lot to do with the farming.
Yeah, I guess especially, as global warming is taking effect, it really comes down to that, right? Like you can lay off oak, but you can only lay off oak so much. Or you can use different formats of oak, but that only affects it so much.
Yeah.
And I guess as it gets hotter, I mean, it gets more and more challenging. We were at Literai recently, and they're planting, they're letting their canopy drape over the top to act as a shade. And I mean, we're just seeing more and more stuff. It's gonna get harder and harder, I think.
Yeah.
But,
Well, so yeah, one of the things I mentioned earlier is the pruning. So if you classically you want to prune later in the year, like kind of really late, like March.
okay.
And that's to fight disease pressure, because if you prune too early and it rains, you get a lot of mildew,
That makes
or you
sense.
get a lot of fungus
Right.
problems. So for us, we are kind of pushing the envelope, because if you do prune earlier, you get bud break earlier, and then you actually can get an earlier harvest.
I see.
So
Okay.
ideally, what we're trying to do is kind of push it a little earlier, because guess what? Every year, August is gorgeous in Napa Valley.
Yeah.
Like July's a little hot, June's a
Yeah,
little hot.
yeah.
August seems to like chill out. At least
Yeah.
I've been there for 2 vintages now, and it seems to be nice and relaxed in August. But then come September, you get heat
Yeah, that's where it
incidents
gets
again.
all wonky,
So
yeah.
if we can start getting things out just a little bit earlier, that's kind of one of the techniques that we're trying to do.
That's super interesting. So basically, by pruning earlier, you're triggering the plant to start bud break, because it's trying to, I mean, maybe it's in fear of dying. So it's trying to kind of like procreate, right? Bud break into grapes. I wonder if,
I think it
it's,
just has less, it has less volume of things that
I
like
see.
its sap can like go into.
I see.
So if
Okay.
you eliminate all of that, it kind of just focuses on the buds.
On those. That's
Yeah.
cool. That's really cool. That's super interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's great to see all the ingenuity that's taking place and all the ways that people are kind of like changing things and trying to adapt to the ever moving target that is climate. Any thoughts on other grapes? Is there any kind of experimentation going on with other varieties, or do they feel pretty comfortable with Cab and Sauvignon Blanc and
Me personally, or
well
at the vineyard?
At the vineyard, I guess.
We're not experimenting with any other grapes. I mean, Cabernet is just like, that's like the gem of
Right,
Eisele.
right.
But it's a
Yeah, yeah.
it's a pretty small vineyard. It's
Yeah.
only like 15-acre vineyard.
Okay.
So it's really tiny.
Yeah.
So we do have Syrah and Sauvignon Blanc, Sauvignon Muscat, and little bit of Petit Verdot and Cab Franc. So those,
More blending.
we have like 2 blocks that are, one's Cab Franc, one's a Petit Verdot. Those go into the Alta Gracia. The
Right.
Eisele is like just the blocks of like Cabernet along the Simmons Creek that is like deep and rocky. And then we just acquired the vineyard next door. It was the Frediani estate. And this is, so Eisele Vineyard always had this big chunk missing, like an L shape, like
Yeah.
a big square out of the corner, which is a continuation of the creek, which is like the most exceptional sites. So we were able, the Frediani family, actually, the kids, he passed away a couple years ago, and we've been farming it for the last few years, kind of checking it out. And the kids sold it to us. So it was such a rare opportunity to get a continuation of the best part of the land.
Right.
And there was a bunch of other grapes planted there. Like, we weren't really sure what they were. There was like maybe Valdigay and whatnot. And unfortunately, it really is like clear as day, like the difference in biodynamic farming and not.
Yeah.
Like, so the soils were so poor in that vineyard and the vineyards had a lot of disease. So we ended up having to take almost like 98% of it out. So we did try. We left a row of 100-year-old Carignan vines
there you go.
along the road.
Yeah.
And we did make one bottling of Carignan in 2023. However, unfortunately, those vines also were showing signs of viruses.
Yeah.
So we ended up having to pull them.
So the most rare wine is the Carignan.
Yeah, so
Single
there
bottling
is
of
a
Carignan.
single vintage of 2023 Carignan.
Wow.
But
there
I
you go.
highly doubt it will be released.
Yeah, that's okay.
I haven't even tried it yet.
And then Syrah is going into a Syrah bottling.
Yeah, so Eisele, we make about 20 200 to 250 cases of Syrah.
Oh, I
a year.
guess I never realized that.
Yeah, it's a little tiny section of the vineyard that it doesn't really go into the market very much. It's kind of a unicorn wine.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was going to say.
It's beautiful. We make it with amphora. It's like half amphora and half old Foudre. So it's a really great Syrah, but
That's awesome.
we rarely get to like have that one available.
That's funny.
It usually sells out pretty quick.
Yeah, it must be fascinating to be working for an estate that's as heralded as this. Harold Halls? I don't know. What am I thinking? What's the word?
It's
well respected.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on, I know we're going a little long for where we should be, but one of the things that I want to touch on is just kind of like your role there is selling to restaurants and retailers, right? So you're kind of a sales rep, but you're also working directly for the winery or for the company, I guess. How challenging is that? I mean, I guess you were doing at your previous role, you were kind of responsible for accounting and things like that. Is it similar to what you were doing, or is it more complicated? Because also these wines are rare and allocated and they're hard to get.
I would say that this job is like a monster sales rep job.
You have all of California.
It's a really big job. So it's very very busy. Right. So I'm handling the entire state of California. Mm-hmm. So I travel to Los Angeles and Orange County and Sacramento, Napa Valley, mm-hmm. San Francisco, everywhere. Mm-hmm. I'm all over. I'm driving a lot. So that's the big part, is just managing your time, because traveling takes a huge chunk of your time. Yeah. But other than that, I mean, I'm really just representing the wines, presenting them in the market, sharing them with the clients, and doing tastings just like another rep, but I just have a larger sales territory, and I have the absolute privilege to, like, one of the like parts of the job was I have to actually go there, and just work out of the winery. Yep. So that was the agreement when I started, and they're like, you can stay here, but you have to come here. Mm-hmm. So you at least every other week. So I'm That's up great. There every other week, and I stay at the vineyard for at least a day to 3 days. And I always, like, at night after work, I go for a walk through the vineyard, and I take lots of pictures, and I just find all the new things to ask questions about. Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of it's a really cool, unique job that I've never, like, I still to this day just feel so lucky that they asked me to do this job. Mm-hmm. And I respect the wines and the work that my team does. And on top of that, like, our French sister estates are just all like such forward thinking and like climate change and biodynamic farming, and they're all just doing,
and still benchmark world-class wines.
Yeah, just incredible wines to work with. So it's a dream come true. I'm just like so lucky. That's awesome. So but yeah, overall, I mean, I'm really just you could deduce it to a sales rep, or spokesperson. I don't even care. I'm just out sharing these wines with people.
There's a lot of beauty to that.
It's so much fun. Yeah.
Well, so the wine, do you want to give it a final stab before we...
Gosh. Okay.
There's these guys, this will be my tangent while you're analyzing the wine. There's these guys that I like to follow on Instagram, Super Vino Bros. They're in New York, and they blind each other on, like, all kinds of, like, crazy off the wall shit, you know? And I'm always just like, I feel, appreciative to have the classic training that I do and to know, like, certain regions well, but, like, skin contact, Alsatian Riesling, I'm like, I would bomb that every time, you know? So again, the wine's not always blindable. Sometimes it's blindable, sometimes it's not. Um, so you could take a stab at it if you want.
So
but
what you're trying to tell me is this is not going to be a testable grape
I'm
in
not
the
saying
advanced
anything.
course.
I'm always throwing the reminder out there that the grape is. It's more about us enjoying a beverage and not analyzing the wine too much and just kind of having a good time and talking. But
Yeah. I would say this wine is like very savory.
yep.
Like that's the most, that's the most vibrant note out of it. It's savory. It has it's definitely, it's a deeper concentration of color as well with a kind of purpley magenta rim. So this is taking me to a couple grapes just by the color. But even then, going forward, there's this very savory characteristic to it. And then there's a little bit of elevated alcohol, but not out of balance or anything. So it's, and then structurally, the palate is nice, elevated acidity as well. Tannins are present, but they're not kicking your butt. So that's why I'm it's not really an Italian wine. But I mean, there's that acidity, but the tannins are not that strong because when I'm looking maybe down there, I would consider Aglianico.
Sure.
Definitely not a Nebbiolo at this color or Sangiovese. So, but really, I'm very much in this southern France area.
Yep.
I feel like it is savory. It's got olive. It's got rosemary. It's got herbs, dark fruit, bramble, blackberry. I really feel like this has a little bit of Syrah in it, or it's a Carignan,
Sure.
or it's a GSM from the Rhone, or it could be a I don't know, a Mourvèdre or something.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm kind of in that camp, but I'm not exactly sure.
That's a good place to be.
Yeah.
I think that's a good spot.
Yeah, for vintage wise, I'd say it's pretty young.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty youthful, so I would guess this is no more than 3 years old.
It's a 23 Eisele Vineyard Carignan. No. I wish.
Watch
That'd
this
great.
be a New World wine.
Well, it's as mentioned, it's not always blindable. This is a wine you may or may not be familiar with.
Yeah, okay.
Flywheel. I wanted to pick something. Scott's been on the podcast before talking about Roar. He didn't really talk about his project that much. I'd love to have him back on to talk about Flywheel. But I'm a huge fan of the wines that he's making, and especially the Syrah. I think that it's a great kind of everyday Syrah. And then Chalon is an area that I don't think it's not blendable with any grape.
It's
think.
it's an underrated area.
Yeah,
of
for sure.
Yeah, I did used to represent these wines, and I met Scott because I used to represent the Roar wines,
right.
And he's a really great guy, and
total sweetheart.
Yeah, these were so kind of rare. But the funny thing is, when I worked with them, we always had older vintages,
right? Yeah.
So it was I never got to really taste them actually fresh or new.
Yeah.
Because it was just such a tiny little section of this world.
Yeah, the production is it's relatively small. It's funny when he came on, I kind of wanted him to talk about it, but he was here to talk about Roar, and I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's not a lot of other producers that I can think of off the top of my head that are in Chalon, and there's not a ton that I could think of.
I will actually say Syrah is. I think Syrah is a California stunner.
Yeah.
I mean, not just this one is quite delicious and it's very affordable too.
Yeah.
I tried a Syrah recently and I'm so sorry I cannot remember the producer. They were somewhere in the Mayacamas, a mom and pop, very inexpensive Syrah that tasted so expensive.
I love that.
I was it's so crazy that they just can't command the price, and then the market, it's like really hard to sell Syrah in like at a restaurant to like clients. But I do think that Syrah in California is one of the greats.
I hope that we can get to a point where kind of this I mean, maybe it'll happen at once or maybe it won't, but I think people are kind of pivoting to other regions now and other areas in the world for affordability. And I think that there's still a lot of affordability to be had in California, especially when it comes to like the world of Syrah. And I hope that eventually that will lead us back into the realm of doing more like interesting domestic wines by the glass, because I like Melville Syrah to me is like an all-time top California Syrah that I love. I was thinking of Ojai the other day. I love the Ojai Syrahs. I mean, there's so many cool Syrahs out there. Bianca blinded Morgan and I on a bottle of La Serena, the Heidi Barrett Syrah. It was awesome. You know, there's so much cool stuff out there that's so underrepresented. And then my all-time favorite domestic Syrah ever is the Rogers Creek Vineyard from Ramey. Well, John at Boulevard, he makes some Rogers Creek Syrah too, which they ripped up in 21 or 22. The vineyard's gone now, which is upsetting. But yeah, I love domestic Syrah, and so I was just like, well, I don't have any Latour or Eisele Vineyard. I figured I could pour you something that's fun and interesting for us to drink and talk about at the same time.
No, this is great. Yeah, this is bringing me back down memory lane.
Good.
And yeah, I was checking out the podcast with Shelley.
Oh, yeah.
I think it came out like a week or two ago.
Yeah.
Long days in the car.
Yeah.
And sorry, is that mine?
That's yours. That's okay.
I'll turn that off.
I didn't double check before you sat. So, I mean, we made it a long time though.
Yeah. Anyway, but you guys were talking about all these Italian grapes that are kind of making a comeback in California, and that's really exciting to me as well.
So excited.
I'm like, that just makes so much sense.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Cabernet in Napa, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited to see all these new varietals that are coming. And it just, with drought, with heat and climate change, Italy's a hot place too, and it's mountainous. It's like so similar.
Yeah, it's very coastal. Yeah. I hope too that, I mean, the affordability factor is something, again, I kind of go back to is like, while people want to drink California wine and Cabernet won't always fit into people's everyday budget, there's a lot of other great wines that are grown in California that can be affordable. And I mean, we're really in this epicenter. And I think it's kind of like the anti-homogenization that's taken place in Italy also, right? These people were making very similar styles, or they were just making bulk versions of their wine. Now they're focusing on indigenous grapes or discovering things that were lost or kind of set aside. And I'm excited for that too. I think that while, California Cabernet is obviously like wildly important, just like
it's majestic, but
just
it's
like Barolo in Italy and Brunello in Italy, it's like, yes,
it's majestic, but we also need something kind of, you need something old, something new.
Exactly. Yeah.
You love your beautiful Napa wines that you set down and age, and but also it's so fun to see what younger winemakers are doing, especially out in the Sierra foothills or just different areas where people have gone because the land is really expensive over in the classic region. But then it's kind of fun because it's a experiment in seeing what works out there. And I think that's the best way that will attract the next generation to drink wine and carry on all the work that we've, that our whole industry has done.
I think so. I hope so. Yeah. Please, next generation, when you listen to this, when you dust this podcast off and listen to it. No.
Yeah. Wine is cool.
Wine is cool. Wine can be so cool. Wine can be way too cool, but wine can also be
Wine is
cool
fun.
enough.
It's social. It's a conversation piece.
Yeah.
It has history, whether it's like hundreds of years or just brand spanking new.
Yeah.
There's so much going on, and It's so much fun, and I hope people do. In the next generation, I do hope they can learn to embrace it. I know it took me like a long time to get into wine. It was like late, I would say 2017. So that would make me 29 back then. So I was in my late 20s. So I guess give it some time.
Yeah. And now you're 31, you know.
Yeah. Time flew by.
Yeah, give it some time. I mean, it's always I ask people like, oh, do you know much about wine? And they go like, I know what I like, or they say I don't know anything, and I say, do you know what you like? And they say yes. And I go, that's it.
Yeah,
that's it. That's the most important thing. Do you like this? Do you not like this?
Yeah. Oh my God.
If you don't like it, try something else.
Non-wine industry people always ask me the same question. They're like, "What is your favorite wine?"
Oh, I know.
I'm like,
that's my favorite.
I don't know.
I'm like, it depends on the weather, the day of the week.
Yeah.
It depends on what I'm eating. Am I eating? Am I not eating? You know, am I mad? If I'm mad, I want something like tightly wound Syrah.
Yeah.
No.
I will say probably Chateau Gruyere though is my favorite wine.
Okay. All right.
But I can't really explain that to the person who asks.
That's true. That's hard. Yeah. I'll wear my Biacart Simone hat. Mine's Biacart Simone, champagne all day. No. Cool. Well, any advice, any life advice or wine advice that you want to offer to anybody before we sign off? Or words of wisdom or whatever? No,
I mean, I just feel like keep trying wine and supporting the winemakers, and go out to the restaurants and support your sommeliers who put a lot of work into the wine list, and, you know, and the wine reps who helped, you know, get these wines to them, and then the wine teams who grew the wine and harvested it. It's just like, it's such a chain of such amazing people.
It's an ecosystem.
It's just go out and try some wine and ask questions, and don't be afraid to ask, and don't feel stupid. Go try wine.
Yeah. Try it. I love that. Cheers, Cory.
Cheers.
Thanks for hanging out. I appreciate you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.